If you were born in the ancient Arabian desert and you looked up at the scorching midday sun, you wouldn't actually see a father figure.
Right. Definitely not.
No, you would see this fierce, punishing, like deeply feminine force. But if you were born in the freezing winters of ancient Scandinavia, that exact same sun was seen as a gentle, nurturing, life-giving mother.
It's just such a fascinating inversion, isn't it?
It really is. And today, we are going to explore why almost everything we think we know about gender, biology, and even the universe might actually be completely backwards.
Yeah, we tend to assume that our current cultural definitions are somehow hard-coded into reality, like they're objective laws.
Exactly, like gravity or something.
Right. But when you start looking at the deeper structural patterns, you realize we've basically been arguing over labels while completely ignoring the underlying mechanics.
And honestly, that argument has just become incredibly exhausting for, I think, a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about the current cultural discourse surrounding human gender and identity today. It feels like a tractor pull in the mud.
Yeah, just totally.
There is zero forward momentum. It's just this endless, stagnant tug of war between two extremes. On one side, you have this strict biological essentialism.
Right, the idea that everything is just a hard-coded, unchangeable physical box based purely on anatomy.
Exactly. And then on the other side, you have this purely social constructivist view, which says it's all just a completely arbitrary, voluntary invention, just a whim of society.
Right.
And if you are, a curious learner, someone who genuinely wants to understand how human beings operate, you are likely just drained by this flatline debate.
Yeah, it's draining because it's limited.
Right. You're probably sitting there thinking there has to be a deeper, more dimensional way to understand this that doesn't force me to choose between these two incredibly limiting viewpoints.
Well, and the thing is, when a framework can no longer adequately describe the complexity of the reality we actually live in, it just generates friction.
Just noise. Exactly, just noise. It stops being a tool for understanding and starts being a weapon for arguing. And it just leaves people feeling overwhelmed and, frankly, underinformed.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what the research we're looking at today addresses. We are doing a deep dive into a comprehensive source titled The Fractal Grammar of Gendered Relationality.
So our mission today is to entirely reframe how we see the world using this specific text. We are tossing out the muddy tug of war altogether.
Tossing it completely out.
Yes, because what this material offers is a lens that, if you apply it correctly, completely shifts how you view the dynamics in your family, the structure of your workplace, and literally the mechanics of the stars in the night sky.
It's a profound paradigm shift. And the core of it is that this source steps entirely outside of that biological versus social debate. It just abandons the premise altogether.
Right, it doesn't even engage with it.
No, not at all. Instead of treating gender as an anatomical container or a societal wing, this research proposes that gender is an infinite, scale-free, relational operator. Okay, let's unpack this. Because scale-free relational operator, I mean, that sounds like we just walked into a graduate-level physics seminar.
It does sound a bit heavy, yeah.
If we are going to build a completely new way to see the world, we need to translate that into plain English. We really have to move beyond this idea of the anatomical box.
Right, so a relational operator simply means a dynamic between two things. It is a fundamental grammar of push and pull.
Okay, push and pull.
Think of it as a structural law of complementary forces that repeats across basically every single layer of reality. It operates within our own individual minds, it operates in how we structure our communities, and it operates in the mechanics of the cosmos.
Wow, okay.
The foundational premise of this entire framework is that gender is a functional polarity of dynamics. It's a way of describing how two complementary forces interact to create a stable, working system.
So in the context of this source, when we use the words masculine and feminine, we have to completely strip away our modern political baggage. We are not talking about physical body parts. We are talking about verbs, actions, like functions.
That is the absolute vital distinction here.
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is that the source explicitly defines the masculine dynamic, not as a type of body, but as a specific kind of force.
Okay, what kind of force?
It is defined strictly as the differentiating force.
Yeah.
It is boundary setting. It is the structural scaffolding, the outward projection, and the executive agency within any given system.
Right, so it's like the drawing of the line in the sand that says, this is the boundary. This is where the system ends and the outside world begins.
Correct. And in constant necessary balance with that,
Yeah.
you have the feminine dynamic Again, defined functionally, not anatomically.
Right, functionally.
This is the integrative holding force. It's containment, it's generative nurturing, internal coherence, and somatic or bodily awareness.
Got it.
So if the masculine is the force that draws the boundary, the feminine is the force that fills the space within that boundary and, gives it life and warmth and cohesion.
To help visualize this, let's think about the process of building a house. I think that's a good analogy.
Yeah, that works perfectly.
If you want a house that is going to survive a brutal winter storm, you absolutely need the rigid steel framing. You need the exterior brick, the load-bearing beams, the weatherproofing.
Right, the structure.
Exactly. That is the differentiating structural force. It projects outward against the elements, and it sets a hard, unyielding boundary between the inside and the chaotic outside world.
Yeah.
So in this framework, that is the masculine dynamic.
It creates the necessary structural integrity for the system to exist at all. I mean, without it, the environment simply washes the system away.
But if you just have steel beams and concrete walls, you don't really have a home. You just have a cold, empty cage.
It's totally unlivable.
Right. To make it a functioning, thriving environment, you need the interior insulation, the drywall, the warmth of the furnace, the soft furnishings, like the livable space that holds the family.
The containment.
Yes, that is the containing, integrative, nurturing force, the feminine dynamic. And you can't argue that the steel beams are better or more important than the insulation or vice versa.
No, because they serve completely different complementary purposes.
The house literally ceases to function as a home without both forces existing in a state of dynamic equilibrium.
That analogy strips away the biological and cultural baggage perfectly. The steel doesn't care about our modern political debates. It just knows it has to bear weight.
Right.
And the insulation just knows it has to retain heat. Now, the text refers to this repeating pattern as a recursive isomorphism.
Wait, isomorphism. So meaning like same shape or same form.
Yes, exactly.
So you're saying the shape of the forces building a house is the exact same shape as the forces operating in other systems, like how the branching pattern of a river looks exactly like the veins in a leaf or the neural pathways in our brain.
That is exactly what it means. It is a structural pattern that repeats itself self-similarly at different levels of complexity.
Okay, wow.
So the house is one level, but the same shape of forces applies everywhere, including inside your own head.
I mean, think about your own day yesterday. Have you ever noticed that after, say, 8 hours of intense boundary-setting focus at work, you come home and physically cannot make another decision?
Oh, absolutely. Decision fatigue.
Yeah. Maybe you were managing a project, enforcing deadlines, projecting your will outward to accomplish a task. You are operating entirely in that structural differentiating mode.
And the research argues that if you stay in that mode indefinitely, the system, meaning your mind and body, begins to fracture. You become rigid, brittle, and eventually you just burn out.
So you come home, you close the door, and your brain is just screaming for containment. You have to shift gears.
Oh, I have to.
You take a warm shower, you vent to a friend, you allow yourself to just feel the exhaustion of the day, you comfort yourself, you are engaging in somatic awareness and internal coherence.
Right, you're shifting into that integrative mode.
Yeah, every single healthy human being on Earth must oscillate between these two polarities within their own mind to survive.
When we flatten gender into a purely physical one-dimensional metric, we lose the vocabulary to describe this internal human reality.
Yeah, we just don't have the words for it anymore.
Right. In classical Hermetic philosophy, or in Jungian psychology, this was actually understood perfectly. Jung talked about the anima and the animus, the idea that every psyche contains both the masculine and feminine principles.
Okay.
The source material argues that psychological equilibrium is achieved by coordinating both of these principles within the self, just like the steel and the insulation in your house.
It's kind of like having a dominant hand, right? Just because you are right-handed and you use that hand to write and throw doesn't mean your left hand doesn't exist.
No, not at all.
You still absolutely need both hands to navigate physical reality.
The source actually uses that exact metaphor of biological handedness. You might naturally express a dominant polarity in your daily life, but you retain the complementary polarity within you.
That makes a lot of sense.
And this brings us to a fascinating threshold, because once you understand that these are functional roles verbs, not nouns, you can start to see how this plays out in the most complex, concrete human relationships we have.
Okay, so building a house makes sense for steel and drywall. And oscillating between focus and relaxation makes sense for a single human mind. But humans aren't drywall.
No, we're a bit more complicated.
Just a bit. So how does this relational grammar actually play out when blood, biology, and, other people are involved? Like, what happens when a system is fundamentally missing one half of its assumed biological equation, like a single parent?
Well, the single parent is the ultimate crucible for this theory. And according to the research, it passes the test brilliantly. We have to look at the functional demands placed on a caregiver.
Right, let's walk through a specific scenario. The source highlights this example of a single biological male raising a child entirely alone.
Okay, yeah.
Now, in a traditional flatline biological view, this man is only a father. He is restricted to the mailbox.
By definition, yeah.
But the source explicitly argues that to successfully raise this child, this father must step fully, comprehensively, into the functional archetype of the mother.
And we have to look closely at the mechanics of how and why this works. Because gender, in this framework, is a relational grammar. A developing child is a highly vulnerable, rapidly expanding system.
Yeah, they need a lot of input.
Right. To develop into a healthy, integrated adult, that child's nervous system requires both polarities. They require the structural scaffolding rules, curfews, instrumental guidance, preparation for the external world.
That is the boundary setting.
Exactly. But they equally require emotional containment, generative holding, unconditional warmth, a safe harbor where they can process their anxieties.
So imagine a Tuesday night in this single dad's house. It's like 7 to 0 p.m. And the kid completely refuses to do their math homework. They just want to play video games.
Classic Tuesday.
Right. So the father has to step in and draw a hard line, no screens until the work is done. In that moment, he is operating the differentiating structural force.
He's enforcing the boundary.
Right. He is enforcing the boundary that prepares the child for the demands of the external world. But then, say, an hour later, the kid breaks down crying. Not because of the math, but because they reveal they were bullied at school that day.
And if the father stays in the rigid, boundary-setting mode if he just says, toughen up and finish your math, he fails the child in that moment.
Completely.
The child's nervous system is demanding containment.
The child doesn't care about the chromosomal makeup of the person providing the holding. The child's nervous system just knows, I am fractured right now, and I desperately need to be held.
Precisely. The child's developmental architecture demands functional complementarity. So that anatomical male raising the child alone shifts gears.
He asked you.
He sits down, he holds the child, he listens, he provides the emotional warmth and safety that allows the child to process the trauma of the bullying.
Yeah.
He is, in that relational dynamic, operating the feminine pole perfectly. He is providing generative holding.
And conversely, think about a single mother. She's biologically female, but when she is setting the hard boundaries, enforcing the curfews, teaching the child how to negotiate conflict with that exact same bully at school, she is simultaneously embodying the protective boundary-drawing discipline of the father.
The fascinating argument made here is that single parents survive and their children succeed precisely because a single human being contains the infinite capacity to operate both polarities across different contexts.
Anatomy doesn't restrict them.
No, anatomy does not restrict a parent from providing the necessary structural or nurturing forces.
Yeah.
If anatomy were an absolute, unyielding restriction, if only women could contain and only men could set boundaries, single parenting would theoretically be an impossible biological hurdle.
The kid just wouldn't make it.
The child would simply fail to develop the missing psychological half. But the data shows that isn't what happens at all.
So what does this all mean? Well, this framework is profoundly liberating for parents. It proves that what a child needs is the functional dynamic in both forces. They need the geometry of the relationship, not necessarily a specific chromosomal pairing in their caregivers.
Right.
And the source notes that extensive sociological and developmental research confirms this. Children raised by same-sex couples experience positive developmental outcomes entirely comparable to those raised by opposite-sex couples.
Because the essential developmental polarities don't vanish just because there are two mothers or two fathers in the house.
Right. The needs are still there.
The structural requirements of the system remain. What happens is that these forces are functionally distributed, negotiated, and embodied between the two caregivers.
Okay, so how does that look in practice?
Well, one parent might naturally lean towards the boundary setting, so handling the discipline, the schedules, the external logistics, while the other naturally leans towards the emotional holding.
Okay.
Or they might fluidly swap these roles depending on the specific crisis of the day.
So the developmental necessity is simply the presence of both complementary structural roles. It is about the shape of the care, not the biology of the individuals providing it,
Exactly.
which is just such a massive breath of fresh air compared to the stagnant debates we usually hear. But let me ask you this. If this geometry works perfectly for a single parent oscillating between two modes, and it works for a couple negotiating those modes, what happens when we scale it up to, like, 50 people or 5,000 people?
This is where that term recursive isomorphism really shows its weight.
Right, the repeating pattern.
Yeah. If this grammar of boundary and containment is a fundamental law of organization, then structurally it should scale up indefinitely. It shouldn't stop at the front door of the family home.
Okay.
It should govern the meso-level of societal institutions.
Let's break down how the source maps this out, because when you look at human organization through this lens, it's honestly like putting on 3D glasses for the first time.
It really is.
Let's start with education in schools. How do boundary and containment manifest in a high school?
So in an educational institution, the structural differentiating force, the masculine pole, is represented by the mechanisms of rigorous testing, deadlines, grading curves, and disciplinary rule enforcement.
Okay, the rules.
It is the framework that challenges the student, sets a standardized bar of achievement, and projects them outward toward an external metric of success, like college admissions or the workforce.
It's the syllabus that says this 10-page paper is due at 5:00 p.m. on Friday. If you submit it at 5:01 p.m., you lose a letter grade.
Right. Very strict.
It is a hard, unyielding boundary that forces the student to organize their time and energy.
And the feminine pole in that exact same institution is the collaborative learning environment. It is the supportive guidance of the school counselors, the teacher who stays after class for an hour to help a student who is struggling with dyslexia,
Yeah, the support system.
or the accommodations made for a student's emotional well-being during a family crisis. It is the integrative holding force that ensures the student doesn't shatter under the pressure of the academic boundaries.
Imagine a school that completely lacked balance. Like, let's say a school was entirely masculine in its functional dynamic. It is nothing but tyrannical metrics, zero-tolerance rule enforcement, and pure, cutthroat, bell curve competition.
The outcome is highly predictable, unfortunately.
Yeah.
The students would experience severe burnout, massive spikes in mental health crises, and the institution would become a factory of anxiety rather than a place of holistic learning.
It's just totally toxic.
A significant portion of the student body would simply drop out because the structural pressure lacked any holding capacity.
Now imagine the exact opposite. A school that is entirely unconstrained containment. There are no deadlines whatsoever. There are no grades, no standardized tests, no rules about attendance.
Right.
It is just pure empathy, emotional processing, and unguided self-discovery.
The institution would collapse from a complete lack of structure.
It wouldn't even be a school anymore.
Right? No actual academic differentiation would occur. The students might feel incredibly validated in the short term, but they wouldn't be prepared for the friction of the external world. They wouldn't learn how to overcome resistance or meet external demands.
It's the exact same dynamic in the corporate workplace. Let's move away from the house metaphor and think about a corporation like a biological organism. The source maps this out beautifully.
Yeah, I love this comparison.
The masculine pole in a corporation is the skeletal system and the muscles. It is the market competition, the drive for expansion, the quarterly target metrics, the aggressive sales goal.
To push.
Yes, it is the outward thrust into the economy to capture resources.
And if a company doesn't have that outward differentiating drive, it just doesn't survive in a competitive market. It fails to secure capital.
Right.
But the feminine pole is the internal culture. It is the cardiovascular and immune system of the organism. It is employee welfare, human resources, team building, systemic coherence, and psychological safety.
A company that operates solely on ruthless expansion, so all bone and muscle, no immune system, might hit its quarterly targets for a year, but it will hemorrhage talent.
Oh, absolutely.
It'll foster a toxic culture of backstabbing and eventually implode from within. We see these corporate burnout stories in the news all the time.
Constantly.
And conversely, a company that focuses solely on internal feelings, catered lunches, and endless mental health days without actually producing a competitive product or hitting sales targets will simply run out of money and go bankrupt.
You need the skeleton to stand up, but you need the blood to keep the tissues alive.
Exactly. The forces are objectively real. You have to capture market share, and you have to heal and retain your workforce.
Right.
Okay, I have to push back here for a second, just on behalf of the listener who might be feeling a bit uneasy about this terminology.
Sure, go ahead.
If we take this to the level of the government, are we really saying that a nation's military or its border patrol is male and its healthcare system and social safety nets are female? Because to a lot of people, that just sounds like we are taking old school 1950s gender stereotypes and projecting them onto massive, complex government bureaucracies. Isn't that a dangerous oversimplification?
That is a very sharp pushback, and it highlights the exact conceptual trap that the source warns us against falling into.
Okay, good.
The source is exceptionally careful to clarify that we are using familial metaphors, the words masculine and feminine, to describe universal systemic relationships.
Metaphors.
Yes, the relationship is boundary versus containment. The label we apply to it is just the limited language we inherited.
So we are confusing the map for the territory.
Exactly. The source refers to this specific confusion as epistemic friction.
Epistemic friction.
It's what happens when our system of knowledge or vocabulary grinds against the actual reality of how things work. When we talk about a government, the structural need for both forces is the undeniable reality. A state must have defense, borders, the rule of law, and a foreign policy that projects its sovereignty outward.
Right.
That is the boundary-setting function. Historically, human beings called that masculine because of biological dimorphism. Men were generally larger and fought the physical wars. But the function of a border exists independently of human biology.
Right. I mean, a border wall doesn't have chromosomes. A fighter jet doesn't have a biological sex.
Precisely. And simultaneously, a state must have social safety nets, healthcare, public infrastructure, and mechanisms to care for its vulnerable populations.
Yeah.
That is the containment and nurturing function. Historically, because women bore children and managed the immediate kinship holding, we labeled that feminine. But a hospital doesn't have a gender. A pension plan doesn't have a biological sex.
The error is in thinking that the words masculine or feminine are the objective physical reality of the institution, rather than just the poetic labels our species came up with based on our earliest experiences of the family unit.
Yes, beautifully put.
We look at a massive, complex nation-state, and we use the vocabulary of the household to describe it because that's the first organizational system we ever understood.
The system of a nation requires the same geometric balance of forces that a healthy family requires, and that a healthy individual psyche requires. It must project outward to survive, and it must nurture inward to remain coherent.
It scales all the way up.
It does. If it lacks boundary setting, it is conquered by external forces or dissolves into anarchy. If it lacks containment, it collapses from internal revolution, inequality, or decay.
That distinction is so crucial. The forces of boundary and containment are universal laws of organization. The gendered terms are just the sticky notes we put on those forces.
That's a great way to say it, sticky notes.
Right. And if you follow that logic, it doesn't stop at human institutions. Here's where it gets really interesting. We have to scale this up to the absolute macro level.
Yes. When we do, we see the exact same functional polarities governing the mechanics of the universe itself.
The literal universe.
The research details a cosmological mapping that is truly profound. In physics, you have forces of centrifugal expansion, radiation, energetic emission. This is the structural, active, differentiating pole.
Think about a star. It is a massive nuclear reactor burning in the void of space, constantly pushing energy, heat, and radiation outward.
Yes.
That is the ultimate differentiating force.
And that outward push is perfectly balanced by gravitational attraction, orbital containment, and density. That is the integrative holding pole.
Okay, the pull.
If a star only possesses outward expansive radiation, it lacks containment. It immediately explodes into a supernova and destroys itself.
And if a star only possesses gravitational attraction with no outward radiation pushing back, it collapses in on itself and becomes a black hole. It basically crushes itself out of existence.
Right.
The stable, life-giving star that anchors a solar system exists entirely in the dynamic tension between the outward push of radiation and the inward pull of gravity.
The universe itself organizes through this grammar of push and pull. But what the source points out, which is absolutely critical for understanding human culture, is how we have historically looked up at the sky and tried to name those universal forces.
This is where we get to the absolute mythological proof of this source's thesis. We have to talk about the cross-cultural inversions of the sun and the moon.
This is one of the most compelling parts of the text.
I know, it's wild. In the modern West, we have this deeply ingrained assumption that sun equals male and moon equals female.
It feels like an objective, unshakable truth to a lot of people raised in European-descended cultural matrices. You think of Apollo, the radiant sun god, and Diana, the cyclic moon goddess.
Right. We think active radiating heat is inherently masculine, and passive reflecting coolness is inherently feminine.
Yeah.
But the source walks us through these incredible cross-cultural historical examples that prove our labels are completely arbitrary. They are entirely dependent on the specific environment a culture evolved in.
It's all about the ecology.
Exactly. Let's contrast two very different ancient cultures. The ancient Norse of Scandinavia and the ancient cultures of the Arabian Peninsula.
So if we look at the Germanic and Norse mythologies, evolved in the freezing, harsh climates of Northern Europe, the sun is female, she is Sol, or Sunna.
Just imagine living in a world where the winter lasts for over half the year. The cold is a constant, deadly threat. It kills your crops, it freezes your livestock, it can kill you in the night.
The brutal environment.
In that ecological reality, when the sun finally returns in the spring, it is not seen as a harsh, conquering father. It is seen as a gentle, life-giving, radiant mother bringing warmth and salvation back to the earth.
She is the ultimate generative holding force.
And in that same Norse mythology, the moon is male. He is Mani. He is the brother of the sun.
Right.
In a dark, freezing, treacherous landscape, the moon provides the reliable, tracking, measuring light. He is the protective brother who guides the way in the dark, setting the boundary against the total blackout of night.
So in Northern Europe, Mother Sun and Father Moon. Now, completely switch environments. Let's look at the ancient Arabian and Semitic cultures, evolving in the scorching, arid deserts of the Middle East.
Okay, totally different climate.
In those cultures, the mapping is entirely flipped.
In the desert ecology, the sun is not a gentle, life-giving mother at all. The midday sun is a fierce, burning, overwhelming, and potentially lethal force.
Yes, it is.
If you are caught in the desert sun without shelter, you die.
Therefore, the ancient Arabian cultures viewed the sun as an intense, punishing, deeply feminine force that was overwhelming and consuming.
And the moon, in stark contrast, was viewed as male. Why? Because in the desert, you travel at night.
You have to.
When the temperature drops, the moon rises and provides the cool, guiding, benevolent light necessary for safe travel and trade. The moon was the protector, the rational guide, the father figure of the sky.
We actually see this inversion in Shinto mythology in Japan as well. The primary radiant supreme deity is Amaterasu, the female sun, and the calm, nocturnal cyclic deity is Tsukuyomi, the male moon. And the Inuit cultures in the Arctic have the exact same mapping as the Norse. Melina is the female sun, and Igluk is the male moon.
This synthesizes the core thesis of the entire framework so beautifully. Why do these cultures flip the genders? Because a culture projects its own ecological and social experience onto the cosmos.
They map what they know.
Right. The fact that cultures can completely swap the gender labels back and forth proves the source's central thesis. The polarity itself is absolutely real.
Yes.
There is an undeniable dyad of two interacting, complementary bodies in the sky heat, and cool, constant, and cyclic, radiating and reflecting.
The structural relationship, the geometry of the forces is universal.
Yeah.
But the cultural signifier, the linguistic label we attach to it, is completely arbitrary and local.
It's just a word.
Right. If masculine and feminine were fixed, hard-coded biological properties of the sun and the moon, these ancient cultural systems wouldn't have been able to invert them so fluidly.
It shows that humanity has always used the familiar, intimate language of our own kinship, of mother and father, of brother and sister, to describe the terrifying, beautiful, massive forces of nature.
Because it's what we understand.
Exactly. We look at a star and a moon, and we map our own family dynamics onto them so we can comprehend them. The epistemic friction happens when we mistake our poetic maps for the actual territory.
Right.
The territory isn't a man and a woman in the sky. The territory is just forces of boundary and containment.
And when you mistake the map for the territory, you stop understanding reality. You start arguing about whether the sun is objectively male, rather than understanding the physics of radiation and reception.
Yeah, it's a massive distraction.
Which brings us perfectly back down to earth to the cultural debates we started with.
Right, let's bring this vast cosmic understanding back to the mud wrestling match. Because right now, society is locked in that exhausting debate, and the source material offers a profound critique of why we are so stuck. It calls our current state of discourse flatline thinking.
Flatline thinking is the error of compressing this entire infinite, multi-dimensional fractal stack from the cosmos down to the government, down to the psyche, and squashing it into a single, one-dimensional metric of physical genitalia.
It's like trying to play a grand, complex game of chess, but demanding that every single piece on the board must act exactly like a pawn just because they're all made of the same wood.
That's a great analogy.
You lose the ability to play the game entirely.
In partially reporting the source's stance here, it points out that modern ideological arguments on both sides of the spectrum fail miserably because they lock reality into these rigid, flat boxes.
Okay, on both sides.
Yes. The hyper-traditionalist models try to mandate that biology must dictate function in every single aspect of life, ignoring the massive adaptability of human beings.
Right.
And the shallow pop culture models try to erase the reality of functional polarity altogether, pretending that structure and containment aren't distinct, necessary forces that govern reality.
Both extremes fail because they either reduce these massive universal relational archetypes to physical sex, or they try to deny the archetypes exist at all.
Yeah, and by doing that, society renders itself completely incapable of understanding how things actually work.
Flatline thinking simply loses its explanatory power. If you adhere strictly to flatline thinking, you cannot explain how a single father successfully holds both the boundary and containment functions.
You just can't.
You cannot explain how same-sex households distribute these roles functionally and raise perfectly healthy, well-adjusted children. You cannot explain why a corporation needs balanced forces of market structure and employee welfare to survive.
When people mistake the human metaphor for an unchangeable biological law, they become trapped in dogmatic thinking.
They really do.
They miss out on the incredible flexibility of how humans actually relate, how they parent, and how they organize societies. We're so much more adaptable than the boxes we try to stuff ourselves into.
Absolutely.
Think back to that single father on a Tuesday night. If he understands this framework, if he knows that he inherently possesses the capacity for maternal containment within his own psyche, he is freed from the anxiety that he is somehow failing his child by not being a biological woman.
He realizes the function is already within him.
He realizes that the capacity for both forces was hardwired into the human operating system from the very beginning. This isn't a new invention.
No, it's ancient.
It goes back to the primordial blueprints of philosophy, the idea found in the Taoist concept of yin and yang, where the seed of the opposite always exists within the dominant pole. The human organism is fundamentally a composite of both polarities.
We have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's take a breath and sort of recap this journey.
Sounds good.
We started by walking away from the stagnant tug-of-war of modern debates, realizing that gender, according to this source, is not a biological container, but a universal relational grammar of boundary setting versus emotional containment.
We explored how that grammar is perfectly embodied by a single parent, who must fluidly oscillate between the differentiating force of discipline and the integrative holding of comfort to meet a child's developmental needs.
We watched that same geometry scale up fractally to our meso-level institutions. We saw that our schools, our corporations, and our governments all require the exact same balance of rigid structure, the skeleton and empathetic welfare, the immune system, to avoid collapse.
And finally, we saw it reflected in the macro level of the cosmos. We looked at the cross-cultural myths of the sun and moon, contrasting the Norse and Arabian ecologies, to prove that while the complementary forces of the universe are objectively real, the gendered labels we apply to them are wonderfully, arbitrarily human.
It completely dismantles flatline thinking. It hands us a 3D lens to view a 3D world. And it fundamentally changes how we view conflict and balance.
Which brings us to an important question, a final thought to leave you with as you go about your day.
Okay, what is it?
If this source is right, and every human being in every institution inherently possesses the capacity for both boundary setting and emotional containment, well, where in your own life are you currently out of balance?
That is a deeply clarifying question to ask yourself.
Think about your daily interactions. If you find yourself constantly clashing with a specific person at work or having the exact same repetitive argument with a partner at home, step back and look at the functional dynamic.
Look at the shape of the forces.
Right. Ask yourself, are they simply representing the necessary containment to your excessive boundaries? Or vice versa? Are they trying to provide the insulation because you are just building way too much steel framing?
What if the people you disagree with the most aren't actually your enemies? What if they are just the other half of your own fractal equation, desperately trying to bring a shared system back into equilibrium? It takes the tension from being a destructive force to being a necessary structural adjustment. It reminds me of the tennis match we talked about at the very beginning of the show.
So
Well, maybe the goal of the argument isn't to smash the ball past your opponent to win the point and end the game. Maybe the goal is to realize that the back and forth motion itself is the dynamic tension that keeps the entire game alive.
The friction isn't a flaw in the system. The friction is the system.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it gave you some aha moments, and we encourage you to keep looking for that hidden grammar of boundary and containment in the world around you.